QQube, it's hard to describe, but the way I understand it is it's a data warehousing system that creates a duplicate of your QuickBooks desktop database and reorganizes it in a way that it makes it easy for, I don't want to say anyone, but anyone with a notion of custom reporting, that could use those fields in a meaningful way to create the reports outside of QuickBooks. So some of the systems often associated with building reports outside of QuickBooks are Microsoft Access, obviously Excel, SQL, Crystal reports, Crystals with a Y, I apologize for the misspelling, Tableau, and obviously Power BI, which is what we're going to showcase. So QQube is a tool that takes the QuickBooks data outside of QuickBooks and it displays it and organizes it in a meaningful way, hopefully so the user or creator of these custom reports can use that data, can pivot it, can group it, can make graphs with it, and so forth. Now, this is going to sound like a commercial for QQube, and I just have to explain the pricing because it's a tool that you have to purchase. QQube it's for one user, one company, $425. For 5 users, one company, $795. For 10 users, one company, $14.95. What I love about this is it's not a subscription, it's a one-time purchase. Now, with all 3 of these options, if you pay an extra $195, you get up to 3 companies, so you can run 3 companies in QQube. You can run reports independently, or you can also combine or consolidate it. And for $395 instead of the $195, you can manage up to 100 companies. So I'll just give you a quick example. A company that has 2 QQube users and manages 4 QuickBooks files would pay how much? So let's do the math. $795 plus $195, that would be $990. Okay, so that would be in a nutshell what that would cost. So let me just exit out of it real quick and go to their website just to show you how you have to buy it. And by the way, so if you're really turned off by the fact that you have to buy something for this webinar to be meaningful, I apologize. This is just how it is. All right, QuickBooks has some strong reporting capabilities, but QQube has really unlocked it. So I go to QQube.net. That's actually the best way to go to the website, and that takes you straight to the shopping cart, QQube.net. You click on QQube Technologies, and there's all the options. Most folks are going to start with the $425. That allows you to have one company, one user, but then you can build them as you go in the shopping cart. Okay, so that's as much as I will tell you about buying QQube. Now I want to go into my YouTube channel real quick and show you 2 crucial videos that you have to watch if you never ever built a custom report in your life. Okay, so let me go into my YouTube channel, just because if you happen to be stumbling upon this webinar and you've never seen any of my webinars before, you're going to have tough time kind of understanding where we're going with this. So if you are, you hit pause here. So if you are going to, so I'm going to type Hector Garcia CPA and do QuickBooks custom reports. So if you never build custom reports in QuickBooks, I recommend that you watch this webinar, the one that says building custom reports in QuickBooks Desktop. Okay, any of those will work, and we'll kind of explain to you the logic and the limitations that QuickBooks Desktop has in terms of report building. So I think that's going to be very crucial that you go through these videos. Again, if you never build a custom report. And the other one is I'm going to type the word commission. Okay, and if you actually do this video right here called using QuickBooks Desktop to build a sales commission report. So that would be like the second video you want to watch. This one shows you how to take the data from QuickBooks into Excel without any tools and using pivot tables to build a report. So if you've never done custom reports in QuickBooks or taken QuickBooks data into Excel, there's some of these webinars may be out of context for you. So I apologize for that, but that's just an important piece. So let's talk about QQube itself. So I'm going to jump straight into the software. So this is what the QQube tool looks like. It's basically a little window that sits there. It doesn't really do much by itself. This is where you pick, which QuickBooks files you're going to be connecting with. Whether you have the one company, the 3 companies, or up to the 100 companies. they will all be listed here, and it will tell you if the data is loaded or refreshed, because it does have to sync or duplicate. Then under available analytics, you're going to see all these options. So every one of these things that you see here, finance, operations, customers, every one of these things are the different areas that QQUBE has built for analytics. And if you click on any of these and you click on more info, it'll actually explain to you what type of data you can get from it. So you can start seeing all the type of data fields that you can often see in it. And it just kind of tells you what is in there. So it's actually a great resource for you to click on those. Now let me go straight into Excel and show you what this looks like in the real world once you have QQUBE connected, right? So once QQUBE is connected and your database is synced up, what you do is you're going to open up Excel, and what I'm showing you now, it's called the Excel add-in for QQUBE. So you can actually use QQUBE strictly for pivot tables, right? You actually don't have to do QQUBE for Crystal Reports or Power BI. QQUBE is by itself a great tool just to build pivot tables in Excel. I'm going to get rid of all these and just kind of show you how this works. Okay, so I'm going to build a report from scratch. So I just want to deconstruct this report and show you how it works. So this is QuickBooks data. Okay, this is coming from this QuickBooks file, QuickBooks data, and I want to build a report that maybe QuickBooks cannot do. For example, let's say I wanted a report that will show me the customers let's just tell you what the limitations of QuickBooks are. So let me go to Reports, Custom Reports, and click on Summary. And let's say, for example, that under columns, I wanted to have my months, and under rows, I wanted to have my customers. Let me just hit OK for a second. So this is like sort of the limitation. Let me do this fiscal year, and let me collapse it. So this is the limitation I have with QuickBooks. I can only pick one column, one row. I can't go multiple layers deep, and I'm also limited to what's in here. So I only have about 15 fields or so that I can use for columns and rows. So this is the closest thing to a pivot table we have in QuickBooks Desktop, but it is very, very limited. So I'm going to show you how we would construct a similar report in a QQUBE, and what can we do beyond what QuickBooks can do. So what you see here in Excel, this is basically a standard pivot table I'm going to put together. Here where it says QQUBE add-in, these are all the fields that QQUBE unlocked from QuickBooks to make it available in this particular case in an Excel pivot table. And later on, when Avi jumps in, they'll make those fields available for Power BI. So I can come in here and look for customer, for example, and then I can look for customer name and look at all these things that I can pivot, and I can enable it. So I can say, look, I want to be using the customer name. So now that we have that unlocked, you're going to see it here on the right side. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam to make it a little bit easier. So I come to the right side and I can say, okay, I want the company name, customer company name, to be under rows. So I basically just click and drag that on the rows, and there's all my customers' names, and that should mimic, kind of what we're seeing here. I mean, I haven't run any filters yet to tell it what kind of data I want, but that's what I'm doing. I'm putting the customers on the rows in this case. Let me go back to Excel. Okay, so there's my customer name, and then I'm gonna come up here and look for the date. So if the date is not here, we can pick it off from the left side, and we're gonna look for calendar. So right here it says calendar, and we're gonna do transaction date, and we're gonna look for transaction date, and we'll look for the month, and look at all these awesome things that we have. So I can go transaction date, number in month, turn that on. Actually, let me do month abbreviation. That would likely be better. So I'm going to turn that one on. Okay, and then that's now going to be enabled, and we can bring that and put that under columns. Okay, so now you start seeing that the pivot table starts getting constructed on the right side. Let me make this a little bit easier to read. Okay. All right, so then what do we want is the values, and this is just a regular pivot table. and we want sales information. So we're going to look for line sales amount. That will bring in the dollar amount, and we'll click and drag that down into values. And we'll start bringing this in. Okay. And you start seeing how the report starts being constructed. So these are the sales amounts by month. But what, so far, this is something that QuickBooks can already do, where this gets a little bit more detailed in what I can do that QuickBooks can't, is, for example, I can grab information like, let's say, classes, and I can sub pivot them under customers. So I can go here under class, and I can enable here, for example, class name, and I can click and drag that and bring that into, let's bring that class name, bring that under customer. And then now all of a sudden I have customer name, class, right? And I have all the numbers in there. Let me do, instead of month, because obviously not that much information, let me bring that up. And let me go to calendar, transaction date, and just do quarter. Quarter may be a little bit easier. So what we got here, let's do quarter number. Bring that under columns. Where are you? Transaction date, quarter number, there it is. Click under columns. And I'm also gonna bring in the year, so transaction date, year number, turn that one on, and bring that under filters. And then I can come up here in the left and I'll select, okay, I only wanna see 2017, for example. Okay, so now we're seeing the same information. Let me collapse this a little bit. So I'm saying the same information by customer, by class, by dollar amount based on the quarter, right? And so I'm just kind of showing you a very light version of the power that this has. But I mean, just strictly talking about pivot tables, you start seeing exactly how deep you can go. Now, there are some common questions that we get, and I'm going to answer them while we're here. One of it is, does this work with QuickBooks Pro, Premier, or only Enterprise? So I'm going to say it works with all versions of QuickBooks Desktop, Pro, Premier, and Enterprise. So all versions of QuickBooks Desktop. And then someone else says, in QuickBooks Enterprise, there's a free version of a tool called QODBC. And I want to point that out because I want to make sure that folks are not confused about the difference. QODBC. So I'm going to go to QODBC.com, I believe. So this tool here, it's available with QuickBooks Enterprise for free, and it's awesome. The problem is that none of the fields are pre-calculated and pre-organized for you. So you have to have an extensive knowledge of the QuickBooks database itself, and you have to have extensive knowledge of SQL query building, because you would have to make these calculations on your own. Like you would have to actually tell it to calculate two numbers or to rename them into something else for them to be meaningful. What QQUBE does is it gives you what you're seeing on the screen. It gives you very easy to understand labeling for these fields. That way you can get started on building this type of reports right away. Let me reset this whole thing here and show you sort of a different dimension of this. So I'm going to bring this whole thing back. And let's talk about, for example, items. And this is an area where people really want to do detailed reports on items. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look for my items field. So let's look for items. There we go. There's item. And then I'm going to go down to and pick item name. So let's go down and pick item name. There it is. It's already there. I'm going to grab item name and put that under rows. Okay, so there's all my item names. And then I'm going to do something pretty interesting. I'm going to bring in sales amount, but instead of sales amount, I'm going to bring the profit margin. So instead of just bringing the amount by itself, I'm going to bring the amount and the profit margin. So actually, I'll bring all three. So I'm going to bring amount, then I'll bring cost of goods sold amount, and I'll bring the profit margin. So now we're seeing sales amount, cost of goods sold, and profit margin. Now I'm also only gonna use item. Let me only use inventory items. So I'm gonna go to item type. There it is. Let me grab item type. where are you? Item type, there it is. I'm going to grab that into filters, and I'm going to click on the drop down menu and say, look, I only want to see inventory items, and hit OK. So now we essentially have a report that shows me all of my items, the sales amount, the cost of goods sold amount, and the profit margin. Now, where this gets super awesome, it's I can also do this at the invoice level. So I can, let me come up here and go to transaction, a document number. Where are you? Give me a second.
The document attributes?
Yeah, document attribute. Hey, Avi, how are you? So there's document attributes, and I'm gonna bring in my document number, which will be my invoice number. So that's document reference number. Okay, that one was already enabled. So I'm gonna do document reference number, bring that in on top of item. So now I have every one of my invoices, the items in the invoices, the line amount, the cost of goods sold, and the profit. And I could even bring in the customer name if I wanted to. So I can bring the customer name, bring that above. And now I have my customer's name. Did I grab the right one? Let me just see, because my screen is really small. Let me bring that back up. Where's my customer's company name? Okay, customer's name. Okay, so I'm gonna have my, down for a second. I don't know why the customer's name is not showing up. I haven't paid too much attention to that. Let me second. Okay. So I don't know why the customer's name is showing up blank. I would have to look into that. Let me take that out. Let me look at a different field. Let me try company name. Maybe company name will do it. No, company name won't do it. Let's go to document customer name, possibly. Document customer name.
I think that's in its own table, customer. And I was playing with this yesterday. It's obviously one of those sample databases. So I noticed the same thing. The company name was blank, but customer name
Yeah,
should
customer
work.
name. Yeah, so it has to be customer name. Okay. Yeah, customer name, bring that up. There it is. So there's my customer name, there's my invoice number, there's my item, there's the sales amount, cost of goods sold amount, and sales profit amounts. I mean, this stuff is just really, really powerful stuff. Let me see if there's any questions before I swing it over to Avi. So I wanted to kind of get your appetite wet on it, and of course, it's impossible to kind of understand it until you actually experience it. So I'm showing you one small dimension of QQUBE. I'm showing you the dimension in which I use it for pivot tables. Okay, this is actually what even the owner of QQUBE says. This is probably the most popular one, but in terms of it's potentially the least powerful one, because pivot tables are great, but they're still semi-limited, especially on the graphical piece, on the graphical piece. So, Avi, are you ready for me to swing it over your way?
Yep, I am.
Okay, I didn't see any more questions. Okay, well, I'll ask this one real quick. One says, does this work with QuickBooks Online? The answer is no, absolutely no. Um, Tim Grant, who's an expert in this field, is saying, you build the reports. Does the customer need to contact us every time they need an updated report or a new one? So I would say, look, one of the great things about QQuBE for Excel is that Excel is a similarly transferable skill, and it's not that difficult to teach. And as long as the customer knows that there is a sync feature where the data it's being synced, and the sync happens every so often. Once the data is synced through QQuBE, so QQuBE creates this a most updated duplicate whatever version of the database. And if they are on Excel and they kind of see here when the last sync was done, and they can actually click here and push the sync, so you can actually run the sync manually. So as long as there'll be a scheduled sync, but if the client knows that the sync is happening and this whole thing is set up for an auto refresh, notice that this has an auto refresh option here. As long as they know that there's a sync and a delay on the sync of an hour or so, whatever you set it for, and there's an auto refresh, technically, Tim, they shouldn't have to call you to create another report. Now, if they start moving things around on the pivot table and they don't know how pivot tables work, then I would say, yeah, they would likely have to call you again. Um, and then he's asking a follow-up question is, should customers purchase QQube and build reports on their own? I think if they can learn pivot tables and they can have someone kind of walk them through it, I would say yes. But you could use QQube to create reports for your customers, assuming you're a consultant and just work that way. Or you can get your client into QQube themselves and have it build it on their own. I would say that would just be, that would just be up to you and how you work with your customer. But I would say, yeah, you're definitely going to have to train your customer in some basics if they want to tweak with it. I have a question from Leticia. It says, what about the date period? So yeah, so sorry about that. I didn't show that piece. So under calendar, I can actually pick here transaction date, and I can actually pick a specific transaction date, or I can bring in transaction. Let me bring in under calendar, I'll bring in like the years, for example. So I'm going to go to calendar, transaction date, and select, let's say, year number. So that's already enabled in here. And I can come in here and do year number, bring it here onto filters. And then I can select, okay, I only want 2016, whatever that year happens to be. And then I can do year end date, bring that into the filters as well. So I can do year and date, bring that in there, right? And I can select, the actual year and date instead of selecting the actual year, or I can bring the date beginning or the date ending. So you can actually play with all these filters, and you can even do some slicers. And I'll allow Abby to show a slicer in Power BI, which is very similar than in pivot tables. But you can do slicers, so you can just click in them in a graphical way instead of using the standard pivot table tool.